Have you ever felt this conflict within yourself? God asked, as if whispering in the silence of the heart, that incessant struggle between what your body desires and what your soul secretly cries out for. Isn't it true that sometimes you feel torn, as if two opposing forces were pulling you in opposite directions? The man fell silent, his eyes lost in memories of unfulfilled desires, of temptations resisted and yielded to. Yes, he replied, there is a war within me, a voice that desires the ephemeral, the immediate pleasure, the comfort of the flesh. But another voice, fainter, calls for something greater: peace, purpose, fulfillment. This is the oldest battle, God said, almost with a melancholy smile. The body desires what destroys, while the spirit yearns for true life. They do not understand each other. They cannot coexist without a struggle. The flesh refuses to yield, and the spirit cannot remain silent. The man felt a lump in his throat. How could he explain the inner turmoil that made him stumble so often? But Lord, how can I find balance? How can I live when every part of me screams for something so different? How can I let my spirit win this battle if my body insists on dominating? God then spoke with a voice full of tenderness yet firm as a rock. It wasn't meant to be easy. You weren't made for a life of silent defeat. Freedom doesn't come from ignoring the flesh, but from facing it, from choosing daily to die to what binds you and live for what sets you free. But this renunciation, the man hesitated, seems so hard, so lonely. How can I crucify my flesh if it's part of me? If it cries out louder, more urgently? To crucify is not to forget who you are, God replied, but to transform. It is a daily death, yes, painful, but necessary. A constant choice, not a moment. Think of the sprout that breaks through the earth. It must tear its covering even if it causes pain in order to blossom. The man imagined the scene, that seed struggling against the earth, desperate to be born. What if I fail? What if I weaken? What if my body wins and I get lost along the way? God then raised his hand and pointed to the invisible horizon. You are not alone. I have never been far away. The promise is not that you will never fall, but that I will be there to lift you up, to renew your strength. Victory lies in persistence, in rising after each fall, in the daily choice to get back on track. For a moment, the man felt hope blossom. And how do I begin? Where do I begin this struggle that seems so big, so immense? Look within, God spoke softly. Listen to your spirit, even if it whispers. Acknowledge your carnal desires, but don't surrender to them. Observe your emotions, your thoughts, your weaknesses, and surrender them all to me. Renunciation begins with recognition, with the courage to face yourself without masks. The man took a deep breath, a mixture of fear and courage filling his chest. What if the flesh revolts? What if the desire becomes impossible to resist? You will be surprised at the strength that resides within you, the strength of the Spirit I have placed within you. But that doesn't mean you will fight alone. I have given you resources, strategies, the Holy Spirit to guide you, to strengthen you, and people who can walk with you, to support and encourage you. The man looked up at the sky, feeling the immensity of what had been revealed to him and the weight of the choice before him. So this isn't a battle with an immediate end, but a journey, a walk of daily steps, of small victories and constant rebirths. God nodded. Exactly. You don't have to be perfect, just willing. Every step toward the Spirit is a step away from the slavery of the flesh. But be careful. The flesh doesn't give in easily. It will try to seduce you with false promises. It will try to convince you that the struggle isn't worth it. And I, Lord, how can I recognize these traps? How can I distinguish what is of the flesh and what is of the Spirit, if sometimes everything seems so confusing? God smiled with infinite patience. You will perceive in the silence, in the peace that remains even in the midst of storms, in the love that does not seek its own interests, in the joy that does not depend on circumstances. You will learn to listen to the Spirit, to identify its marks, even on difficult days. The man fell silent, feeling the weight and beauty of that truth. And in that instant, doubt turned into desire, a desire to be reborn, to abandon what imprisons, to find the life God had promised. Are you ready for this journey? God asked. To die to the flesh and live in the Spirit? To discover the freedom few dare seek? The man hesitated, then replied firmly, I want to try. I want to find that true life. I want to learn to win this war within myself. So prepare yourself, God concluded. because this is the greatest battle you will ever fight, but also the most precious, for from it comes the true freedom and peace that only I can give." And in that moment, a seed was planted in the man's heart, a seed of hope which would grow even in the face of hardship, preparing him for the challenge that lay ahead. "You feel the weight of this struggle, don't you?" God began, his voice so gentle it seemed to caress the man's soul. "The cross you carry, the invisible chains that bind you to the flesh, to desire, to fear. But tell me, do you know what crucifying the flesh truly means? Or are you just trying to put out the fire with a bucket of water?" The man frowned, feeling the discomfort of that question. "I thought crucifying the flesh meant denying desires, closing my eyes to temptations, avoiding the easy paths. But it seems the more I try, the stronger they become. It's like I'm fighting shadows that never disappear." God smiled with profound, almost eternal wisdom. "Exactly. Denying is not crucifying. Putting out a fire with buckets of water only delays the blaze. The cross, my son, is not a symbol of denial, but of transformation. Crucifying the flesh is allowing it to die to that which enslaves, so that it may be reborn into freedom." The man felt his heart race. "But how does this happen? How can I allow my flesh to die and be reborn if it's so closely tied to me? What if I lose myself in the process? What if there's no me afterward?" "This is the fear that paralyzes many," God said. "The fear of losing one's identity, of disappearing. But let me tell you a secret. You don't lose who you are. You discover who you were made to be. The flesh that insists on dominating is only a part, noisy, imperfect, temporary. The spirit, however, is eternal and true. But this transformation hurts, doesn't it?" The man spoke softly, as if revealing a deep wound. "It seems that to die for the old man I need to bleed to tear myself apart. Yes, transformation requires pain. The pain that arises from confronting oneself, from the courage to look at one's own shadows and decide to face them. The pain of daily renunciation, of the struggle against immediacy, against the pleasure that deceives." "So the cross is a daily choice?" the man asked, as if trying to understand a mystery handed to him without a manual. "Yes, a choice that is renewed every morning, every moment. It's not an isolated event. It's not a promise of perfection. It's the courageous decision not to surrender to what imprisons you, even when exhaustion knocks on the door." The man lowered his eyes, feeling the accumulated weariness of defeats and setbacks. "What if I fail? What if I give in to the old forces? What if the flesh wins? Does that mean it was all for nothing?" God raised his hand, asking for silence. "Nothing is in vain when there is repentance and a desire to begin again. Victory is not in the absence of falling, but in the determination to always rise. Grace is there, in the new beginning. But I feel like the world around me doesn't understand this struggle," the man said bitterly. "My carnal desires are celebrated, encouraged, treated as if they were true life, and I, who want true life, seem like an outsider, a failure." God touched the human heart with immense tenderness. "It's because the world has been deceived by the illusion of easy pleasure, of instant gratification. The crowd runs after the shadow, believing it to be light. But you, who seek the true light, are going against the grain of the majority, and that is a sign of courage." The man swallowed hard, feeling the weight of loneliness. "How can I go on alone, Lord? When the flesh screams louder and the world rejects me?" "You will never be alone," God replied, "because I dwell within you. My strength will be your sword, my peace your shield, and even in apparent solitude I am your constant companion. But Lord, there are days when I don't feel that presence. There are times when the silence within me is frightening, and it seems like abandonment has overcome me." God responded with infinite calm. "In silence you learn to listen. In the absence of an answer you discover faith. Momentary absence does not mean eternal absence. It is in the dark night of the soul that the roots of the spirit grow deeper." The man reflected, a faint glimmer of hope rekindling in his gaze. "So the crucifixion of the flesh is a journey of faith, of persistence, of love that overcomes pain." "Yes, and it's also a journey of self-discovery. The more you surrender to this cross, the more you recognize your weaknesses and your strengths. The more you understand that true freedom lies not in satisfying the desires of the flesh, but in being master of yourself." "And where do I find this strength?" the man asked almost in a whisper. "Within you," God replied, "and within me. Do not underestimate the power of prayer, of surrender, of sincere seeking. Do not underestimate the power of communion, of forgiveness, of the love that heals and transforms. A silence fell, but it was a silence full of meaning, like an invitation to the next stage of that journey. Are you willing to continue? To face the fears, the doubts, the difficult days, because the path of crucifixion of the flesh is not for the weak, but for the brave who seek true freedom. The man took a deep breath, feeling tension and hope mix. Yes, I want to continue. I want to learn to be free, even if the price is high. Then prepare yourself, God concluded, because in the next step, you will discover the obstacles that the flesh will raise, the subtle traps that will try to lead you astray, and how to be careful not to get lost in the midst of the fire. And so, with his heart beating between fear and courage, the man prepared to face the deepest shadows, knowing that the fight was just beginning, but that, with God on his side, victory was possible. Do you know what the cruelest trap the flesh sets is? God asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp dagger, and the man felt his chest tighten immediately. The illusion of control. The man blinked, surprised by the precision of the word. Control? I thought the fight was against desires, addictions, impulses. But control? Exactly. You struggle day after day to tame your flesh, to silence that inner voice that insists on leading you down the easy path. However, when that voice realizes you're trying to control it, it becomes a master manipulator, creating an invisible prison that's almost impossible to perceive. The man leaned forward, as if trying to better hear the message that seemed like a deep secret. But how? If I strive to control my impulses, wouldn't that set me free? No, God answered firmly, as if speaking a truth that would change everything. Controlling the flesh through the effort of the flesh itself is a losing battle. You are trying to tame a lion with your bare hands. The flesh resists because it is part of the survival instinct. So, I'm doomed to fail, the man asked with a mixture of fear and frustration. If I can't control it, if I can't deny it, what's left for me? What remains for you, God said with a tenderness that brought tears to the man's eyes, is to learn to trust in the transformation of the spirit. Not control by brute force, but by conscious surrender to that which is greater than yourself. The man looked away, fighting an internal storm. Surrender? I always thought that was a sign of weakness, of giving up. On the contrary, God corrected, with a voice that carried the power of thunder and the gentleness of a breeze. Surrender is the most courageous act a man can do. It is admitting that you cannot do it alone, and making room for me to work within you. The man took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it. But what about pride? What about the fear of appearing vulnerable? What will they judge me for? What will I lose if I give myself up like this? Pride is the strongest chain that binds man to the illusion of self, God explained. But it is also the easiest to break when you understand that this chain only exists because you feed it. And the fear of appearing vulnerable? Imagine a tree that insists on hiding its roots to appear strong, but ends up falling at the first wind. True strength lies in showing yourself whole, roots and all. The man fell silent, biting his lip. And how does this surrender work in practice? How do I avoid becoming a hostage to my desires and yet not try to control everything? You need to create space within yourself for silence, God replied, almost in a whisper. For listening, for surrender. When the noise of desires subsides, when you stop fighting them with the same energy, you will see that what remains is not a battle, but a dance of balance between flesh and spirit. But what happens when desire screams louder? When temptation is overwhelming? The man asked, his eyes brimming with doubt and pain. Then it's time to remember that you are not alone, God said, firmly and calmly. Surrender is not an isolated act, but a daily process. When the screams of the flesh seem deafening, turn to prayer, to communion, to meditation. That's where you find the support to carry on. The man lowered his head, sensing the difficulty of the path, but also a glimmer of hope. It seems too difficult. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't be easier to just give up, give in, and surrender to what holds me back. God smiled with infinite compassion. This is the crucial moment. The temptation to give up is the sign that you are on the verge of a profound transformation. Don't give up now. It is in adversity that character is forged, that the soul reveals itself. But I still feel like I can't, the man said, almost whispering. That the flesh is stronger, that my will is weak. Don't count your strength by the times you fall, God replied, but by the times you get up. Every step, no matter how small, is a victory. Every moment of conscious surrender, a conquest. The path is long, yes, but not impossible. A thick silence hung in the air as the man digested those words. What if I fail again? What if I fall and don't get up? There is no failure for those who dare to try, God said firmly, but there is stagnation for those who refuse to continue. The fear of failure is a paralyzing trap. Face it with faith and determination. And what's the next step? The man asked, now with a mixture of uneasiness and eagerness. In the next stage, you will see how the flesh tries to disguise itself, God replied, how it creates masks, justifications, and illusions to remain in control, even when it seems to have surrendered. Being aware of these tricks will be essential to not losing your way. The man took a deep breath, feeling the journey advance and the internal struggle grow. He knew what lay ahead wouldn't be easy, but now he had something more, a faint light, an invisible strength, a hope beyond words. Did you know that flesh has an extraordinary talent for camouflage? God spoke almost playfully, but there was an invisible gravity in the air. It doesn't just fight you, it pretends to surrender to remain in command. The man frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. Pretend to surrender? What do you mean? She creates masks, God replied with the patience of one who knows all the nuances of the human soul. Elaborate excuses, justifications that sound noble and true, but which hide the same old struggle for control. But how can I recognize this lie? How can I know when it's the flesh or the spirit speaking? The question came filled with anguish and doubt, the man almost begging for an answer. This is the deepest challenge, God said, looking into the man's eyes as if unraveling a mystery. The flesh disguises its desires as legitimate dreams, its weaknesses as virtues, its resistance as conformity. It requires keen attention, almost like a detective of one's own soul. The man sighed, almost defeated. It seems like an endless trap. What if I fall for it? What if I accept the masks as truth? That's exactly where the danger lies, God replied firmly, because accepting a lie as truth is like building a glass prison. You see everything, but you're trapped, unable to act. And how do I break this prison? The man asked, his voice cracking with emotion. The first key is brutal honesty with yourself, God said, as if revealing a vital secret. Not the comfortable honesty that denies your flaws, but the courage to face your defects, your hidden desires, your favorite excuses. But it hurts. It hurts a lot, and the fear of losing everything I've built with these masks? God nodded, understanding the silent pain. Yes, it hurts. The truth has that price, but the cost of living a lie is much greater. It's the soul that slowly corrodes, the freedom that is gradually lost. The man closed his eyes for a moment, feeling tears threaten to escape. How can I know I'm on the right path, that I'm not making a mistake? The answer lies in the emptiness you feel after the masks fall, God replied, almost like whispered advice. If after the illusion falls you feel peace, even if fleeting, it's a sign that truth is emerging. If you feel fear or anger, it's the flesh resisting. So the path is to descend into the void, to embrace fear, pain, uncertainty. Exactly. God smiled, almost proud of the man's courage. Emptiness is the waiting room for transformation. It is in the silence of nothingness that the seed of the new can grow. The man swallowed. It seems paradoxical, seeking emptiness to find fullness. Paradoxes are the essence of the human journey, God said. Have you ever noticed how the light is brighter after the darkness? How the dawn is more beautiful after the longest night? But I still fear that this darkness will swallow me, that I will be lost in the void and never return. It's a real risk, God admitted. But the greater risk is remaining in the comfortable illusion that keeps you prisoner. The choice is yours. Lose yourself to find yourself, or hide to remain lost. The man took a deep breath, his heart racing with the intensity of the choice that lay before him. And if I choose to lose myself in order to find myself, what happens then? Then, God said in a soft, firm voice, comes the reconstruction, the reorientation of the self. But this part will be more challenging than the fall, because it's not enough to shed the masks. It's necessary to build a new identity, strong, true, and free. The man swallowed hard, sensing the mountain ahead. What if I don't know who I am without the masks? So this is the greatest discovery of your life, God spoke with a mixture of mystery and hope. Who you are without the masks is what's most worth knowing. Silence filled the space between them. The man felt his soul tremble, torn between the fear of falling and the desire for freedom. "Am I ready?" he asked, almost to himself. "You will never be completely ready," God replied. "But courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward in spite of it." Do you know what the most terrifying moment of the transformation is? God broke the silence with a question that seemed to crash down on the man like thunder. The man looked tense, feeling the weight of that raw, almost cutting question. "What moment?" "When the old me dies," God replied, his voice firm, almost soft, but with a power that could not be ignored. "I'm not just talking about the falling of masks, but the death of everything you believed yourself to be, of everything your ego built to protect itself." The man shuddered. "And what remains after this death? Nothingness. An absolute void that isn't really empty, but the cradle of what hasn't yet been born. It's the abyss where everything falls apart, so that something new can take shape. But the abyss is frightening," the man confessed, his voice breaking. "And I fear that if I fall into it, I will disappear forever." God looked deeply, as if seeing into the depths of that man's soul. "Fear is the guardian of the threshold," he said. "It doesn't want you to cross because crossing means giving up the known, the safe." "So fear is an enemy?" the man asked, still in doubt. "He is a strict teacher." God smiled with the wisdom of the ages. "Fear reveals your deepest wounds, your limiting beliefs, your most deeply rooted attachments. Facing it is an act of courage, not weakness. But courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, right?" The man remembered God's previous words and sought to understand his own heart. "Exactly," God confirmed. "Courage is acting despite fear, and acting often means walking into the unknown without guarantees. But what if I lose everything? Friends, family, my life as I know it." "Losing," God spoke slowly, as if choosing each word with care, "is a necessary part of transformation. Not a punishment, but a voluntary sacrifice to free yourself from the bonds that bind you to a false existence." "But what about the pain? How do I deal with it?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pain is a faithful messenger," God said, "a sign that something within you is being purified. Don't run away from it. Don't numb that voice. Listen to what it wants to tell you." The man took a deep breath, feeling his heart tighten, his body tense between the urge to flee and the need to advance. "It feels like a never-ending battle, an internal war where there's no respite." "Exactly," God nodded. "And this war is the most important one you will ever fight, because it contains the essence of your rebirth." "And how do I know I'll win?" the man asked, almost defying hope itself. "You don't know?" God replied with brutal honesty. "No one knows. Winning doesn't mean coming out unscathed. It doesn't mean never falling. Winning means getting up every time you fall. It means continuing even when all seems lost." "What if I give up?" "Giving up is a choice," God said with a look that was both a warning and an invitation. "But know that even in giving up, there is learning. The difference is that the learning will be through the pain of stagnation, through the price of conformity." The man stared at the horizon, feeling small at that crossroads. "And when this war is over, what will I be?" "You will be what you always were," God said enigmatically. "But freer, more aware, more true. Not a new you, but the real you that has always been hidden beneath layers of fear, lies, and illusion." So the transformation is not a leap into the unknown, but a return home. "Perfectly said." God smiled, like a father watching his son finally understand the lesson. "I'm beginning to understand, but I fear the path is still lonely." "It's lonely," God admitted, "but it's also the path that leads you to your own deepest companionship, the one that doesn't depend on applause, recognition, or approval." "And what do I do when the emptiness is too much? When loneliness seems like an unbearable weight?" "Go back within," God said. "Go back to the silence that exists before the storm. There, in the stillness of the soul, is the inexhaustible source that will sustain you." The man closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. "What if I encounter something that scares me even more than the void? Then you will be ready for the next step," God concluded, "because only those who face their own fear without running away can cross the door to true freedom. Are you prepared for what comes after what you call the end?" God spoke in a voice that was both soft and urgent, cutting through the heavy silence between them. The man hesitated, feeling the weight of that question like a sharp blade. "Ready? I don't know if that exists for something so profound. What will be the after the end?" Is there really an after, or is it just another cycle closing to open another? Ah, God replied with a smile that blended tenderness and mystery. The after the end is not a place nor a time, but an awareness. A clarity that arises only when you accept that everything that has been undone, broken, lost, no longer needs to be recovered. Accepting the irreversible, the man murmured, his eyes lost in the shadows of his own thoughts. That is the most difficult task, isn't it? As if we need to learn to die at every moment to truly live. Exactly. You are beginning to taste true transformation, God continued, which is not an achievement nor a reward. It is surrender. And surrender does not mean weakness, but supreme courage. The courage to dissolve into the unknown without guarantees. But why is it so hard to accept that what we were will never come back? Why do we insist on holding on to fragments that only hurt us? Because attachment is the link that connects your soul to fear, God said, as if revealing an ancient truth. And fear, when covered by false hope, creates invisible prisons, dead-end labyrinths where freedom becomes a distant dream. So, if I let go of the past, of who I am, of who I was, what will be left for me? You, God answered simply, directly, almost disarming the man. Not what you imagine yourself to be, but what you truly